In this Microsoft Power Automate tutorial, I'm going to cover how to add file uploads to a SharePoint list item. First, I'll show you how to get the file name and content from the file uploads from your Microsoft form. Then, I'll show you how to add those files to a SharePoint list item. If you haven't already watched the tutorial where I cover how to get your Microsoft form response into a SharePoint list, click here to watch that video first. The first few sections of this tutorial are taken from a previous tutorial where I cover how to attach your form file uploads to an email. Feel free to skip ahead using the timestamps below. There are two primary types of forms you can create in Microsoft Forms: group forms and personal forms. When you create a new form by pressing the New Form button, you'll be creating a personal form. You can create a new group form by selecting a group first, then pressing the New Group Form button. Files uploaded to a personal form are saved to your OneDrive. Click on My Files and click on the Apps folder. Next, click on the Microsoft Forms folder. Each form that has a file upload will have a folder created for it. The folder name will match your form name. It's important to note that if you change your form name after accepting responses, the folder name will match the original form name. You can rename the folders to suit your needs. Files uploaded to a group form are saved on your SharePoint site. Click on Documents. Just like OneDrive, click on Apps, then Microsoft Forms. For this demo, I'll be using a group form. I have two file upload questions, one with a single file limit and the other with a file limit of 3. In Power Automate, I've created a manually triggered flow. Using a manual trigger will save you a ton of time when you build your flow. Instead of having to leave Power Automate to submit a form to trigger a test, you can build your flow off of a form that has already been submitted. I've already added the Get Response Details action to my flow. Response IDs are assigned sequentially. For this demo, I'll use the first submission by entering a 1 into the Response ID field. If you've already submitted your form multiple times and want to build a flow off of a specific submission, you can get the ID by going to the responses and clicking Open in Excel. Locate the response you want to use and note the response ID in the first column. To better understand how we'll get the file uploads into an email, we'll need to take a look at the file upload outputs from the form response. Add a compose action for each file upload question. Remember to rename your actions to keep your flow organized. Run a test. The output of the file upload questions are in a JSON formatted string. We'll need to convert this to something we can use. Remove the dynamic content and insert an expression. Use the JSON function. This function will parse the JSON formatted string. Click on the Dynamic Content tab and insert the dynamic content from the Get Response Details action. Repeat this for the second question and any other questions you might have in your form. Run a test. Now that the JSON has been parsed, we can easily return the dynamic content of the files that have been uploaded. We'll be using compose actions to output the properties from the file uploads. The compose actions are optional. You can insert the expressions we use directly in any subsequent flow action if you prefer. I prefer to use compose actions to help with troubleshooting. If you are new to Power Automate, compose actions can help you better understand what's going on in your flow. To return the dynamic content of the file upload, we'll need to use the dynamic content key of the property. The dynamic content keys are the red text between the double quotes. Add a compose action to store the name of the single file upload. Insert an expression. Add a question mark and a 0 between square brackets. Even though this file upload question is limited to a single file, it'll still return an array of items. An array is a collection of items. The first item in an array is 0. second is 1, third is 2, and so on. Add another set of square brackets and single quotes. Between the single quotes, enter the dynamic content key. In this case, it's name with a lowercase n. Place your cursor at the start of the expression by pressing the up arrow key. Click the Dynamic Content tab and insert the output from the compose action that is storing the single file upload form response. Run a test. Repeat this for any other dynamic content you'd like to return. For any question that accepts more than one file, you'll need to use an apply to each action. This is because you will need to loop through each file that has been uploaded. Insert the output from the compose action storing the multiple file upload form response. This is why it's important to rename your actions, especially when you have multiple instances of the same action. Because I've renamed my compose actions, it makes it clear which output belongs to which compose action. Add a compose action. Because we are using the apply to each action, we'll need to use the item function in this expression. Insert a question mark, square brackets, and single quotes. Enter the dynamic content key in between the single quotes. Run a test. Depending on how many file uploads your form has, it might be a good idea to group your actions to keep your flow organized. I'm going to insert a scope action for each file upload question. To make my flow more efficient, I'd like to run these actions in parallel. I'll insert the second scope action into a parallel branch. I'll drag these two actions into this scope action, and these two into this one. Because the apply to each action relies on this compose action, Power Automate won't allow me to move this compose action into the parallel branch. Here's a little trick I like to use. I'll copy these actions to my clipboard and delete them. Now I can add them back to my flow by adding them from my clipboard. The scope actions make it easy to collapse multiple actions at once and helps to reduce the amount of vertical space the flow takes up. To attach the files to a SharePoint list item, you'll need to get the file content. Remember that personal form file uploads are stored in your OneDrive and group form file uploads are stored on SharePoint. Select the appropriate action for your flow. Since I'm using a group form, I'll select the SharePoint get file content using path action. Select your site address. For the file path, select Shared Documents, then Apps, Microsoft Forms, and your form name. Because we need to get the file uploaded for the single file upload question, click on the folder for the single file upload question. Select a file. We're going to replace this file name with dynamic content. Highlight the file name and delete it. Insert the output from the compose action above. Run a test. I'm going to add the same action inside the apply to each action. For the file path of this action, navigate to the folder of the multiple file upload question and select a file. Delete the file name and insert the output from the compose action above. Let's run another test. Depending on your flow requirements, you may need to rename your files after they've been uploaded. I'm going to show you how to create a custom file name for your file with today's date, username, and some static text. First, we'll need to get today's date. Whenever you're working with dates and times in your flow, it's always a good idea to use a convert time zone action to ensure you are returning the date and time in your local time zone. Since I'll be using the date in a few actions, I'll insert this action near the top of my flow. In the base time field, insert the UTC-now function. In the source time zone, search for Coordinated Universal Time and select it. For the destination time zone, search for your local time zone and select it. For the format string, search for round trip and select that. When working with parallel branches, keep an eye on the order of your branches. Before I added the convert time zone action, my single file upload branch was on the left. Now it's on the right. Add a compose action to your flow to store the dynamic file name. This compose action is optional. If you want to avoid adding another action to your flow, simply insert the expressions I'll be using directly into the send an email v2 action. I prefer to use compose actions so I can run tests and verify the output before adding the send an email v2 action to my flow. If you want to output your date in a specific format, insert an expression and use the format datetime function. Click on the Dynamic Content tab and insert the converted time zone output from the action above. Add a comma and single quotes. Enter the date format pattern between the single quotes. I'll use this format. Run a test. Now the single file upload has moved back over to the left branch. Verify the date output is what you expect. Adjust the format to suit your needs. To return the username, we'll need the getUserProfile v2 action. It's important to note that this action will only work if the user who submitted the form is part of your organization's directory. External users or guests who fill out your Microsoft form will not have any profiles that are accessible with this action. In the user UPN field, insert the responder's email dynamic content from the getResponseDetails action. In the compose action below, I'll add the display name dynamic content right before the date and insert a space. Run a test. Review the outputs of the compose action. If you'd like to convert the display name to lowercase, you can use the toLower function. Delete the display name dynamic content. Add an expression and insert the toLower function. Click on the Dynamic Content tab and insert the display name dynamic content. Run a test. If you'd like to replace all spaces in the username with a dash, wrap the entire expression in a replace function. Click on the expression label to edit it. The replace function takes 3 parameters. The first parameter is the original string of text. The second parameter is the search string. This is a string of text that you'd like to search for within the original string and replace. The last parameter is the replacement string. This is the string of text that will replace every instance of the search string that is found in the original string of text. Go to the start of the expression and type in replace with an opening parenthesis. Go to the end of the expression by pressing the down arrow key. Add a comma and a single space between quotes. Add another comma and insert a dash between single quotes. Press the down arrow key to go to the end of the expression and insert a closing parenthesis. Don't forget to press update. Run a test. I'm going to add some static text to the start of the file name. Lastly, we need to include the file extension. The file extension is located within the original file name. We just need to use an expression to return the extension only. I'm going to add another compose action to store the file name. Again, this compose action is optional. I'm using it for demonstration purposes. Insert an expression and use the split function. We'll use the split function to split the file name at the period. The split function takes 2 parameters. The first parameter is a string of text you'd like to split. The second parameter is a separator you'd like to split the string of text at. Click on the Dynamic Content tab and insert the output from the compose action storing the file name. Add a comma and single quotes. Enter a period between the single quotes. Run a test. The string of text is now an array of items. The extension is the last item in the array. Click on the expression label to edit it. Wrap the entire expression in the last function. At the start of the expression, type in last with an opening parenthesis. Press the down arrow key to go to the end of the expression and enter a closing parenthesis. Don't forget to press update. Run another test. You can insert the output from this compose action into the compose action holding the dynamic file name. I'm going to copy the expression and insert it directly into the compose action storing the dynamic file name. Don't forget to add a period before the file extension. I'll delete this compose action since I no longer need it. Run another test to verify the output of this compose action. Remember to test often and ensure that the outputs of the compose action are what you are expecting. Customize the expression to suit your requirements. I'm going to keep the original file name for the multiple file uploads. I've already added the actions to this flow that will create my SharePoint item. I'm not going to cover how to do that in this tutorial as I've already done that in a different tutorial. If you haven't watched that tutorial yet, I've linked it in the description box below. If your form only has a single question with a single file upload, insert the Add Attachment action here. Select your site address and list name. In the ID field, insert the ID dynamic content from the Create Item action. In the File Name field, insert the output from the Compose action storing the file name. In the File Content field, insert the file content from the single file upload. Let's run a test. Here in SharePoint, a new item has been created and the single file upload has been attached to it. I'd like to point out that I've added condition actions to each of these scope actions to check whether or not a file has been uploaded. This prevents the flow from failing if a file upload question doesn't have any files. You can refer to the previous tutorial where I go into more detail on this. If your form question allows for multiple file uploads, you'll need to insert the Add Attachment action into the Apply to Each action. In this particular case, I'll need to first remove the dynamic content from these two fields, and then I'll need to drag this scope action above this one. Note that after dragging the scope action above, these two scope actions have switched places. Now I can drag the Add Attachment action into the Apply to Each action. By nesting the Add Attachment action inside this Apply to Each action, each time this Apply to Each action loops through a file upload, it will attach that file to the SharePoint item. In the File Name field, insert the output from the Compose action storing the file name. In the File Content field, insert the file content from the action above. Run a test. Here in SharePoint, a new item has been created and the multiple file uploads have been attached to it. If you have more than one question in your form, as I do, you might think that you need to add an Add Attachment action for each one of your file upload questions. Although you could do this, it would be time-consuming and inefficient. Instead, I'd recommend collecting your file attachments first so you only need to add a single Add Attachment action to your flow. First, I'm going to delete the Add Attachment actions. To collect your files, initialize an array variable in the root of your flow. In the single file upload scope action, add an append to array variable action. Select your array variable. For the value, we'll need an attachment array structure. I'm going to use a send an email v2 action to get this array structure. Click on Show Advanced Options. Add placeholder text into the attachment name and attachment content fields. Click on the three dots of the action and select Peak Code. Locate the attachment array. Select the content between the square brackets and copy it to your clipboard. Delete the Send an Email v2 action. In the value field of the Append to Array variable action, paste the content from your clipboard. Double-click to highlight the name placeholder. Insert the output from the Compose action storing your file name. Select the Content Bytes placeholder. It's important to note that you want to select the quotes as well. Insert the file content from the Get File Content using Path action. Ensure that there aren't quotes around the file content dynamic content. Copy the Append to Array variable action to your clipboard. Insert the copied action into the Apply to Each action. The dynamic content will need to be replaced with the dynamic content from above. Now that both of these scope actions has an append to array variable action, the files from both file upload questions will be collected into the array variable. We'll need to loop through the collected attachments and add them to the SharePoint list item. To do that, we'll need an apply to each action. Insert the array variable here. This apply to each action will loop through each file that has been uploaded. Next, add an add attachment action. Select your site address and list name. In the ID field, insert the ID dynamic content from the Create Item action. For the file name field, we'll insert an expression. Use the item function. Add a question mark, square brackets, and single quotes. We'll need to use the dynamic content key for the file name. Take a look at the array structure. The dynamic content key is name with a capital N. Insert that between the single quotes. We'll do the same for the file content field. The dynamic content key for the file content is content bytes, all one word with a capital C and B. Let's run a test. In SharePoint, a new item has been created and all three attachments have been attached to the item. If you also want to attach the files to an email, you can insert a Send an Email v2 action. I'm not going to cover how to get the values from your form into an email. You can check out the tutorial I've linked in the description box below where I cover how to do that. To send a separate email for each attachment, insert your Send an Email v2 action here. Since the Apply to Each action is looping through each attachment, it will send an email for each attachment. In the attachment name field, insert the same expression as you entered for the file name field above. For the attachment's content field, insert the same expression as you've entered for the file content action above. If you want to send multiple attachments in a single email, you'll need to place your Send an Email v2 action outside of the Apply to Each action. Instead of inserting expressions into these fields, click on this button to insert the array of attachments. If you need to send the attachment to a specific email based on a selection from a choice field, use an email key. I cover how to do this in my previous tutorial. I always like to keep a copy of my flows with a manual trigger as it can come in handy if I want to make changes or troubleshoot any issues I might be having with it. I've created a copy of my flow. Delete the manual trigger and insert the when a new response is submitted trigger. Select your form. In the Get Response Details action, replace the response ID with the response ID dynamic content from the trigger. What other Microsoft Form automations are you looking to build? Let me know in the comments down below. If you found the concepts covered in this video helpful, or if you learned something new today, please consider giving this video a like. If you are using an automated Cloudflow trigger in your flow, you need to consider adding trigger conditions. Don't know what a trigger condition is or how to use them? Check out this video. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on the next Power Automate tutorial. Thanks for watching!